When a mine collapses and miners are trapped hundreds of feet below the surface, we quickly learn more about their lives than we know about some of our good friends. When a child is abducted, the circumstances, however painful, are made known as a warning to all parents who feel deeply the fear and anguish that others are going through. And in the world of media, these are called human interest stories. The reason why they are on the news is it's unusual and that it appeals to our sense of care for a fellow human being. They focus on a specific instance in the life of just a few people in such an emotional way that the story feels much bigger than the small stage on which it's actually carried out. It takes a problem and then it personalizes it to help us identify with those people and the pain so that we feel it deeply ourselves. And I find this ironic in some ways because, again, this is from the media, and yet various media have contributed to depersonalizing much of life. We do not watch a live play. We watch a digitized reproduction at the theater or on TV. We do not talk to people, we text them. We do not assist people in doing the work of the church, we support programs. And the problem is that when we lose touch with the personal element of life, we lose sight of what life truly is and why life matters so much. And in, yes, an unusual way, in an unusual circumstance, Jesus points this out in this text. In what is an abbreviated account in Matthew, longer one in Mark, but what you find here are we're introduced to these two men in quick fashion, and the most notable thing about them is what they are enduring with demons. Jesus arrives on the scene determined in seeing it to do something about it. And then we have the pigs. And finally you see the reaction of the people. And that last reaction is actually the saddest part in ways. But I want you to note that the main characters in the story, what is laid out for us, is Jesus, who is God in the flesh. Demons, pigs. And right in the middle of all this are the men. And because of their situation, the people that know them most have ceased to think of them on a human basis. They have dehumanized these men because of what they've been going through and the trouble that is created. And brethren, I think that happens more in this life than we often think. Whatever else we see in this text, we should realize that people matter. And we should realize how easy it is to forget that. So I want us to take a very simple and practical look at this text. And we begin with this. People matter because they are God's special creation. You've got to really believe it. In verses 30 through 32, now a good way off from them, there was a herd of many swine feeding. So the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out, permit us to go away into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine. And suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea and perished in the water. I know we're beginning in the middle of the story, but for this comparison, it really matters. Men are God's special creation. And in a world that has lost sight of the difference and the distinctiveness of man, the way in which Jesus reacts and treats the men who have been subject to the demons and the pigs matters quite a bit. They are not treated as equal. The pigs are not treated with value. But the men who have been causing trouble, the men who are themselves troubled by these demons, are treated with immense value. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, we see really the reason why. It is because he was part of saying, let us make man in our own image. And therefore, in the image of God created he them, male and female created he them. In the very interesting discovery program Mythbusters, when they wish to figure out how a human body will react under certain circumstances, usually involving death, so you understand, they would often call in what they would call a human analog. Now, for those of you who haven't ever seen the show and don't understand what this means, a dead pig is a good human analog for what will happen to a human body after it's dead. It's a stand-in. And it just so happens that that body of a pig corresponds in a lot of ways. But that's where the likeness ends. It may decompose similarly. It may be of about the same weight and average. That's all. A pig's body may be able to stand in for a human body, but a pig will never be able to stand in for a human being. And that is an important part of what's being taught here. People can reason. Animals cannot. Why were the demons in the people in the first place? Now, I won't go into the whole doctrine and background of demonology, but to understand and appreciate why they were even allowed to be in people. That's where the impact was. And because they were clearly beings of spirit that had intelligence, it could only be expressed in a human body. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28, the distinction between man created and then him being placed in charge of all else in creation matters. Psalm 8 verses 6 through 8, where there we find, as we've already seen earlier in that psalm, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? Why does man matter? Why is man different? He says, you put all things under his feet. And he goes on to list some aspect of all of the natural world, all the animals, all things underneath man. Man was made in such a way in which he can deal with, control, handle, and dominate all the other intentionally. So man can think. People have souls. Animals don't. Why did the pigs rush into the sea? They were not made to be able to handle that kind of interaction. Genesis 2, 19 through 20, it's an important distinction when you go and you see that Adam is there in the garden and the Lord is bringing to him all these animals to name. So we're getting all these different animals and providing for them. But there was not one comparable to Adam. Not a single thing, after everything was named, fit in any way matched up with Adam, which is that he makes woman. And what was missing was the thinking, emotional, and spiritual elements that distinguish man as man. But now it gets even more direct. Animals are expendable. Humans are not. Now, think about what happened in this text. Why did Jesus think it acceptable to destroy the pigs, but unacceptable to be tormenting a person? For some of the people who are trying to play at ethics today on a human basis, they would have trouble figuring out the equation here. It's really not any problem at all. Animals are expendable. There's not a question of whether or not there is a human being suffering and it takes an animal to die, then kill the animal. Because of the difference in the value and for what that animal was made and for what the human being was made for. The human being was made for God's glory, for high and spiritual things, and the animal was made to be able to support and sustain man. In Genesis chapter 4 and verse 4, this part is clear. It's one of the things about why he asked them for a sacrifice. God, throughout the system, Exodus chapter 12 at the Passover, what does he ask for? Sacrifices of what? Animals. In order to accomplish what? To denote the death was required, and yet those deaths could not accomplish what really needed to be done. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 1 through 4. It required the death of Jesus. But even then, he commanded it. Because the animal had some value that the human being needed to understand. That it was a life. And it had blood. But that it was okay to kill that animal because that was necessary in order to sustain man spiritually. And until we put our minds and wrap our minds around this is why we are special and why all the effort matters, we're going to get caught up in all the things that are going on in this world, and it's get pulled in to worldly ideas that miss fundamental truths about this world. You may be able to teach a pig to swim, teach a pig to do tricks, and maybe even teach a pig to herd sheep. But you will never be able to teach a pig morality. For one basic reason, and you can memorize this, they're pigs. You'd think this would be simple to understand, but apparently it's difficult for many people in the world to get. Second of all, people matter more than things. Show it. Verses 33 and 34. Then those who kept them fled, and they went away into the city and told everything, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. So far, so good, right? And when they saw him, they begged him to depart from their region. That's one of the saddest statements you will ever read. At the close of this episode, the selfishness of the people in that place could not be clearer. The people are so upset at the lost revenue in the pigs that they have absolutely no joy for what Jesus has actually done. They have overlooked a miracle because of their pocketbook. And so the people in the city took this amazing thing, and because they were so focused in on how it affected them financially that they missed out on an opportunity to learn about life from the master teacher. And we may say and think, how foolish and how silly, but we will do the same thing about getting so focused on life and on money and on things that we don't have time for Jesus either. We will worry about everything else, and we won't consider the state of our soul. They rejected God's way because they were so committed to the world's way, they didn't see its value. Love not the world, neither the things in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abides forever. 1 John chapter 2, 15 through 17. So let's go and consider some reminders that people matter more than things and that we need to show it. Your spouse matters more than things. Show it. In Colossians chapter 3, 18 and 19, just two brief exhortations. Wives, submit to your husbands. This is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. Why? Because they matter. And that should be reflected in our behavior. That value, respect, love should be played out in every circumstance, and that it should be visible to them how we value them. You'd compare how these people acted towards shoving Jesus away. They had no use and they didn't care about the men and what had happened with them. And how easy it is to just, when we don't get our way or something doesn't go as we'd like, to just kind of move aside. And in that moment, something becomes more important than the person that should be receiving most of our love, save God. Your children matter more than things. And therefore they're not things. We need to treat them and teach them that they themselves, for who they are more important than things. It's not about how many things we can get for our children either. It's about them and their value in God's sight. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Your children matter. And it's sad to see people so caught up in worldliness that they don't realize that they're losing their children's opportunity for godliness. In Titus 2, verse 4, said the older women are to teach the younger women to love their husbands and love their children. To have the care for them which is designed where they are nurturing and bringing them up, and where they understand their value not in a haughty way, but in a humble way. Because it's predicated on spiritual things with spiritual priorities. Your brethren matter more than things too. Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. When you see this kind of verse, it has multiple instances and types of love in it. That we are to prefer one another, that we are to honor one another, that we are to love one another, that there is to be value that we see in the relationships that we have against the world, against things, against work. To understand that these relationships have themselves great value. Because these are the people who are going to be there for you in your bleakest moments. These are the people that know what it means to reflect God's love and can show it to you when you most need it. These are the people who've shown their own commitment to God and therefore a commitment to you. And in a world in which we pride ourselves on our independence, sometimes we forget that we were not made to be completely independent. And that the nature of what we do is to work within in an interdependent kind of way. Because we're all dependent upon God. And we all accept that. And therefore Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 comes in, bear you one another's burdens. Yes, verse 5, there's some loads that only you can handle. But God made his church to be people that we lean upon. And we need to value how God made us and value the people in that process, before, during, and after those instances. Those may be easier, but your neighbor matters more too. Jesus didn't know these men. Jesus didn't have to know these men to value these men. They were automatically of greater value than anything else around, and he showed it. In Matthew 22, verse 39, it says that the second commandment, he says, is likened to the first, love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. To recognize in any particular person that you see that there is someone that could need you to be the neighbor. And therefore, that they need you to show them that they have value. There are people that when you just look at them, sometimes people do a good job of covering up their value. And what we need to recognize is sometimes the way some people will dress or things they'll even do to their body or just hold themselves, they're probably covering up a whole lot of hurt. And they probably have not been shown that they value very much and treated like they've ever valued very much. They need to understand how much God values them, but they're never going to really see that until God's people value them. Your Lord matters more. That is clear and easy to understand on the surface. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, Jesus felt the need to actually say it. No man can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon meaning the god of basically materialism. We have choices we have to make all the time to demonstrate, no, the Lord matters more than this. Every time a choice comes up, the Lord matters more. And there will never be a time that that's not true. He matters more than our feelings. He matters more than our problems. He matters more than all the little things around that we put all sorts of excess attention to sometimes. Lord matters more. We need to show that. The last one is more subtle, though, but just as important. Your soul matters more. Your soul matters more. And you need to show that too. You need to understand that you matter more than things, that you have greater value than whatever is in your bank account, that you have more value than what someone at work thinks. You have more value than what your grades are. You have value because you have a soul. And everything else that you do and have and put on around you is all just the trimming of life that is and should at least be diminished by the way in which you understand yourself as a spirit and a soul. And it's when we start interpreting ourselves too much like the world does in terms of value that we get caught up in these things. Matthew 16, verse 26, "For what shall a man profit if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" And in that passage, if we note, the perspective Jesus is offering is, imagine for just a second, you've already sold off your soul. You've already lost your soul. What are you willing to give up to get it back? That's when you start understanding the value of the soul. And that there shouldn't be anything in this world that you wouldn't offer. Because that's how valuable it is. Brethren, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust doth corrupt, where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, where thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. What do you really value? Who do you really value? It doesn't need to be the things. It needs to be all the souls. Number 3, people matter because of what they need provided. We look at verses 28 and 29. "When he had come to the other side, to the country of the Gerasenes, there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, 'What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?'" Now understand, there's no question, they're a nuisance. They're a problem. They are causing issues with people. They're not letting people go by. It's generally just for society around. You can understand the reaction. But what does Jesus see? He doesn't see and focus on the demons causing the problem, but the men who are their victims. And that makes a huge difference in how we see people. In Luke chapter 19 and verse 10, it says, "The Son of Man came," the word says, "to seek and save that which was lost." The tendency that dominates our thinking is to look at people for what they can offer us. I'm not talking about some kind of horrible kind of a way. Just in general, you say, he can do this, we can do that, we can get all this done. But employers look at what someone has to offer as an employee. That's the relationship. An employee looks at a business for what it can offer him. Okay, how much does that pay? I'm not sure that's worth that, for that paying. People look at the government for what it will provide them. And the government looks at what it can get from the people. But the truth is we can do the same thing in the church. And we end up looking around and it becomes something about, what are we getting out of all this? So let's stop for just a second. And let's realize you will get more out of this than anything else you are part of in your entire life. Because nothing else can offer you the spiritual benefits that a home among God's people can in salvation of your soul. That's the first thing. But the problem is that we think about that anyway. Instead of looking at what we get, once we understand that we're going to always have received more than we can ever give, that frees us and should change us to think in terms of what we can give then. Because we need to change our thinking to be more like Jesus, who saw us in our plight. And it was very similar to these men. Desperate, completely out of control, and no one can help them except Jesus. And so Jesus did. And therefore, as we look around at people and we remember how much they matter to God, then that should affect how we see them and how we treat them. People need our compassion for their plight. We can spend so much time worrying about the blame people should feel for the problems they've caused that we lose sight of compassion. Now, there are plenty of problems people get themselves into that they did to themselves. And I imagine everyone here has done it. You get yourself in your own situation, but when we see others, then that's on them. And we don't think in terms of maintain compassion. There may be more things that need to change for that person to get things right. There may need to learn responsibility, and how we handle that situation needs to address that, absolutely. But it's not an either-or situation of either that person is to be blamed or I have compassion. We are to be blamed entirely for our situation spiritually. We're at fault. And Jesus saw all these people, and he was moved with compassion. They were like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew chapter 9, verse 36. The fields are white unto harvest. He sees the need, and he moves with the need. When Jesus sees these men then, it's not a question that they somehow deserved demons. It's the problem they had was horrible, and there was compassion for it. Also, from this then, people are going to need our help in overcoming problems. You know, it doesn't matter how many people that you have a Bible study with, and they walk in the door, or we just in their home or they're in ours. Part of what we're trying to do is help them overcome their problems in life. The big problem is sin. But everybody has problems, and that's a lot of times what people get caught up in. They needed help with their problem. And Jesus took care of it. As a matter of fact, the compassion came before any kind of conversation with them was going to be possible. You think he's going to sit there with two men out of their minds to try to have a Bible study? No, you have to address the problem first. In Acts chapter 3 and verse 6, Peter and John are walking toward the temple. Here's a man lame, begging, all that they could do. Peter says, silver and gold have I not, but what I have, that I give to thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. People will come a lot of times needing some things, guidance, maybe just some general help in life. They don't know we have bigger things to offer. But we can help them see it. people also need our resistance to their rejection. What it must have been like for men trapped within, out of control with demon, I don't even want to contemplate. Because the demons were doing everything to keep people away. But they saw in Jesus one that was not going to take no for an answer. And it could do something about it. The people, they later on, they're just going to run, go. They don't care. But I want you to think about in John chapter 4, 16 through 30, of how Jesus refused to let the Samaritan woman move the conversation away from where she could really learn something. We have to be more resistant to people's rejection. And that is, just because someone standoffish, pushes us away, that doesn't need to be the last time we ever have that conversation. Sometimes you have to understand, people have a built-in system, sometimes because of being hurt, to just automatically push people off. You have to have their interest at heart more than they do. That's what Jesus was doing. In learning to recognize that there are people that are out there that are hurting, that are lost, and they don't even know that they have self-inflicted pain. And because of that, they don't have the skills, they don't have a perspective, and they're going to hurt you. We just have to be stronger than that and see through it. And that means people need us to see beyond the obvious. It wasn't hard to see all the trouble that these men were causing. That was not difficult. Everybody knew that. It was entertainment. It was part of the show, right? Just a few verses down in chapter 9, verses 10 and 11, it says, "Now it happened as Jesus sat at the table in the house, that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, 'Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?'" The Pharisees were great at being able to observe the obvious. Spiritual subtlety, not their strong suit. They were so convinced they already knew everything that they had no room to actually take a look at what God actually said. Jesus was willing to deal with people who others rejected and ignored. That should never be something God's people do. He embraced any who were willing to learn and to change. But that means you have to be willing to give people a chance to change. And a lot of times we don't. This would have been, I'd say, if you're looking for something, this would be a hard case, wouldn't it? But Jesus took it on. We tend to look at all the obstacles and reasons why not to help others and teach others. Jesus concentrated on correcting what was an obstacle for them. Brethren, look around you. All these people here, they matter far more than much of what you'll focus on every day. When you get home, take a good look at your TV, and then good look at your family. and remember which one has value. When you leave here, look around you. You will see lost souls everywhere that need you to find a way to reach them. If we're ever going to treat people the right way, we must first realize they matter. Jesus lived for people every moment of his life. And he lived for us, though we were not yet born. And we know that because he died on the cross, not because he deserved it, but because we did. And gave us a message through his sacrificial death and resurrection that, if we will listen to it, can bring hope into our lives. Because of what he accomplished, he can reach in and change who you are, remove your guilt by removing your sin, if you will trust him in faith, John 8, verse 24, and be willing to change in repentance, Acts 17, verse 30. By committing to him in your confession, Romans 10, 9 and 10, and the conviction of being willing to obey him by being baptized for the remission of your sins, Acts chapter 2 and verse 38. Jesus died so you could die to your sin and that you could live for him. Why? We matter to Jesus. And Jesus should matter to us. But that means that what matters to Jesus should matter to us too.